As we move on to other news now, we've seen that the effects of the power crisis, the rolling blackouts, are intensifying and negatively affecting consumers and businesses alike. Now, according to data from the banks, the number of consumers who are tapping into their savings has increased in the past year. But at the very same time, the cost of doing business has also increased as operational costs are skyrocketing.
Many hard-pressed consumers in South Africa can barely keep up with the rising cost of living. Financial institutions are seeing an increase in the number of consumers taking up short-term credit to stay afloat. Increases in the price of fuel, electricity and transport costs, among other things, have added to consumers' woes. According to Stats SA, the annual consumer price inflation came in at 6.9% in January, down from 7.2% in December. While consumer inflation moderated in January, it remains above the Reserve Bank's target bracket of 3 to 6%. A worrying factor is a high increase in food prices.
There's definitely been a visible increase just in terms of credit use in the country. And you can imagine now that with the growth in essential costs, people do look at other ways to make means end. Especially because the spending is on things that we don't want to do without. So credit card debt has definitely seen growth over the past year. And, the growth rates over 2022 have been on the rise.
At the same time, banks say the impact of the rolling blackouts has a direct effect on consumers' credit behavior.
The larger impact from load shedding is the impact on the economy, which in turn impacts our client base, our lending growth, and our bad debts. And, certainly we can see the devastating impact that is having with economic growth. Last year, we now saw coming in at 2%. We saw the fourth quarter was negative. Likely that the first quarter of this year will also be negative. So that puts us firmly in the recession territory.
On the other hand, Shoprite says it has spent over 100 million rand on diesel to keep its business going.
We've been asking at least for the relief of the road accident fund, which is a R2.18 per litre. That equates to 10% of the fuel price. So if you take 564 million that we spend, less 10%, makes a big difference. And if you think that additional cost actually started to pick or come into play only here from September. In January, again, the group had to flock out more than 150 million for the additional diesel only.
Eskom continues to ration power across the country as its aging coal plants struggle to generate electricity. The power utility has been moving between stages 3 to 6 of power cuts in the past 6 months. And consumers and businesses alike are feeling the brunt of the intense rolling blackouts. Nothando Makutulela, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Right, so staying with consumer issues, next Wednesday, the 15th of March, the world will commemorate World Consumer Day. So for more on the rights of consumers, we're going to be joined by Tezi Mabuzas, the Deputy Commissioner at the National Consumer Commission. Tezi, good afternoon. Thank you for your time here on the SABC.
Good afternoon, Lizelle, and good afternoon to your listeners.
So we are going to get into the meaning of the day and perhaps the strides that have been taken. So to start off the conversation, let's look at, since the formation of the National Consumer Commission, how far we've come in, protecting the consumer rights as well as consumer education at large.
Your viewers, I think we have come a long way as South Africans in terms of now making ourselves known, not only as a national office, but also the offices that are closer to consumers, which are the Consumer Protection Affairs offices in each province. But again, what we had done as well is that we had come together as all the regulators that are regulating consumer interest in South Africa. That would be in the mix of your national credit regulator, your Financial Sector Conduct Authority, NERSA, ICASA, and also people like your debt collectors. So we came together and we decided that sometimes we need to really make a significant move so that in areas wherein we have our bleeds, we come together as regulators and we affect all the regulations that we are responsible for. So that is actually in terms of the coordination, but then in making ourselves known as regulators in terms of the different mandates that sometimes can be very confusing to consumers.
Yep, absolutely. And speaking of mandates and understanding, perhaps we could look at, what has come to the fore to date and how much consumers, based on, the work you've done, how much consumers have taken advantage to utilize the commission, should the need arise. I'm just looking at this within a South African context, where in the package we heard, consumers are having to use more of their savings. There's operational costs that are increasing and impacted due to load shedding, etc. What's really come about as a result of that?
Lizelle, what we had seen as well as South Africans, besides the number of consumer complaints that keep on increasing, that means that consumers are more aware of their rights and they try to exercise them. But what we have seen, and that is still pertaining to us as regulators, is the unfairness that we see in the market. As the colleagues or the speakers that were before me had said, is that in the middle class or the people that can afford credit, we had seen that a number of them are for now constrained, wherein even when we are partnering, because this year we are partnering with Northwest, which is the Economic Development, Environment, and Conservation and Tourism Department. The area that they were complaining about is the number of employees that are struggling, wherein we're looking at emolument attachment orders that are increasing, wherein the department is actually paying around 2 million each month. That would mean that we are constrained as consumers. But then it says as well that in that space as well, we don't know exactly how to manage our debt. That's where in our sister regulator will come in, the National Credit Regulator as well, to look into that. But then what we are also seeing as issues on the ground is we are still struggling, especially our small businesses, in understanding what their obligations are in creating a fair marketplace. We're talking of issues of measures wherein they will unpack either maybe your sugar or your maize meal into small plastic bags, business spaces that are unhygienic, and then issues that are very minute that we think that now business should be knowing. Issues of just issuing of your own receipt when a consumer buys. So that would mean that once they leave the store, they cannot exercise their rights. So those are the issues that we are still grappling with, especially in the smaller towns and in your township economies as well.
When we look at the National Consumer Tribunal, which, if I understand correctly, is an adjudicative body established in terms of Section 26 of the National Credit Act. And I think for the benefit of our viewers, I just want to look at, processes in lodging complaints. When do consumers take their case to this body, and how does it actually operate?
Yes, a consumer can go approach the tribunal in two ways. First of all, is that if you have a complaint, there is a process that we call mediation. Our provincial consumer affairs officers and the accredited ombuds, which is the Consumer Goods Services Ombud and the Motor Industry Ombud, they have that responsibility to bring you as a consumer and the business together to try and conciliate without really going deeper into the law, so that they bring you together to understand what are the issues, because we think that as a business and a consumer in the same environment, that relationship we want to still create so that we maintain it. But then if mediation fails, then is then that you come to us, or your provincial consumer affairs officers can take that forward, wherein now it becomes an investigation. But then an investigation becomes more of in a criminal space, wherein we are based on the evidence that is before us and we apply the law to the latter. But then when we look at your complaint and we realize that we cannot, or we do not have sufficient evidence wherein we can approach the tribunal on your behalf and go and plead your case. So we become some kind of like your lawyers in that sense, because we will be prosecutors in those matters, and then the tribunal will hear the matter. If that we cannot do that for you, we issue what we call a non-referral. That non-referral allows you to approach your court, which is you apply to say that I want to bring my matter by myself to a tribunal court. And our courts are quasi-judicial. That would mean that they are not really strict in terms of law. Any other person, even if they don't have a legal background, they can approach that. They can approach the court, either a provincial court or the National Consumer Tribunal. And in that case, then they will even guide you on how to file your complaint, on how to argue as well. So those is how you can approach them. You can approach them by yourselves, or if we have sufficient evidence, because we are a creature of statute, we can approach the tribunal on your behalf.
Tezi, it's always somewhat tragic to have to condense the work done to date and unpack everything in these few minutes. So I think in conclusion, just on the back of what you've echoed, as we head and approach World Consumer Day, I wonder what your parting message is. What should come to mind for consumers as we end this conclusion?
What we are saying to our consumers is that we are trying to create a fair marketplace. All that we are saying is that a consumer that asserts its own right, then it becomes a safe consumer. Understand your right, understand your obligation, and then the only person that can actually assert your rights is yourself. So it can only be fair if you know what is it that is right for you. Please do that. File a complaint if you are not happy.
Tezi Mabuza, let's leave that conversation there. Thank you for your time on the SABC, Deputy Commissioner of the National Consumer Commission. Tezi Mabuza weighing in ahead of the 15th of March, which is going to be commemorated as World Consumer Day. Really chatting about the National Consumer Commission's work to date, the impact it's had, and perhaps the role that broader education has in ensuring that consumers' rights are protected, consumers are empowered, and that we achieve a fair marketplace. So thank you to her for her time. We'll leave that conversation there.